Here is a little more detail about the story I briefly mentioned earlier. One Friday morning she told me her brothers were coming over and demanded that I stay home as it was vitally important for her. Any work commitment was not important on my part other than obeying the changed rules of the day. Later, before their arrival, she told me that the brothers coming over were members of the Jehovah's Witnesses Judicial Committee, intending to talk to me in detail, for she hoped and prayed that we could save our marriage. I felt like telling her that since this marriage seemed to be dependent on both of us being in that so-called truth, which to me was nothing but an interpretation of the scriptures by a couple of well-meaning folk in the United States, I could not accept it as my truth. Then, she said, we have nothing to live for without the truth, and so we cannot be together for too long. I responded with, I still believe in true love being unconditional. I had been expecting something like this to happen, and hopefully the pretentious existence I had been leading would finally come to an end. By giving her the utmost freedom for what she wanted to do with her life as a free agent, for all human life needs to be independent and free, I was not going to force my will on her under any circumstances, for I needed no slaves. But it would be lovely to share one's life with a truly loving partner. I felt that Jehovah's Witnesses were choking me to death from every conceivable corner. I stayed home, and the committee finally made it to our place at about 7:30 in the evening. Magda was very excited, happy, and trying to show her brothers what a lovely mother and wife she was by preparing cups of coffee and little snacks for her righteous guests. We sat in the lounge, engaging in friendly conversation, talking about work, study, and my lecturing in important subjects. However, they kept looking at each other and were not at all attentive to what I was saying to them. As they continued sipping their coffees, one of them made a comment about what a great mother and partner Magda was, caring for the spiritual needs of her children. What a good woman she was, caring for her family. And the other said, he hoped that I was a caring husband. Surprised, but in control, I told them how much I loved my family, and that was one of the major reasons why I was desirous to improve our financial standing and help her live a good life without struggle. The other said, but you don't want to be too materialistic? That sounded familiar. This led me to question the questioner, if he was working, but there was no response. Suddenly, changing their tactics, they began to question me about my private affairs, as if I was sinning by working with other women, advising me to be more careful not to hurt my wife by sleeping around with other females. Did working with other women in a democratic society mean sleeping around with the opposite gender? I wondered what the witnesses had been gossiping about me. They started using Bible texts to back up their claims, quoting from the books they had been preaching from when going house to house, while also treating me as if I was the subject of judgment in front of a judge in a country court. They looked like primary school children arguing over something we adults would consider completely trivial. I regarded it as a tasteless comedy and decided to speak of a few Bible texts I was knowledgeable of in respect to what Jesus was teaching, that no one should judge anyone. Do not judge. One of them remarked that I was very knowledgeable about Bible teachings, and therefore I should understand fully what they were about. Magda was hoping they would be able to make me understand the importance of serving Jehovah without question. Science and knowledge based on logic was not acceptable as far as the witnesses were concerned, for their limited wisdom had to be based on no logical construction, but rather on a repetitious biblical one, which they present in various forms, meaning the same thing, using more words than necessary. On one side, they claim scriptural wisdom being simple and easy to understand, whereas they try to complicate their own words when preaching things they do not fully comprehend. Therefore, when questioned, they have no answers. When they are stuck, the only easy way for them is to condemn, judge, and disfellowship the questioner. And then they questioned me point blank, speaking at the same time, asking if I was still attending the evildoers' temple services. Somewhat surprised, I asked them to explain what they meant by that. "Come, come," said one. "Our sister, as you know, never tells any fibs, and she told us all about it. We are talking about your involvement with witches, soothsayers, Buddhists, Hindus, and pagans. We are also talking about the ungodly practices of the Catholic Church and others like spiritualists." Another exclaimed that I should understand that going to churches or temples of all devil worshippers was a very dangerous practice, and believing in their teachings was a grievous sin against God. "Now, I'm going to ask you again. Do you go to those places?" asked one. I answered, saying that I went to St. Paul's for choir singing. "What was the occasion?" "Entertainment, and for Christmas." "But Christmas is a pagan practice. Do you go to those temples also?" Yet another asked, "Do you realize it is the sin to associate with devil worshippers?" "Are you really so sure?" "And how?" I asked the questioner. "What if I am conducting a research program for professional curiosity and interest? What do you mean with that?" After a brief pause, he continued, "Besides, you cannot ask us any questions, for we are the only ones qualified to ask questions for you to answer." I politely responded, "If you cannot accept my questions, we have nothing else to speak. You can understand that much, I hope." "Tell me, what do you think about psychology?" asked one. Magda answered, "Oh, but they hypnotize people against their will, and that is evil." Another commented, "That is when the servants of Satan, the devil, interferes with the free will of the individuals, and therefore it is an evil practice. We can only encourage you not to be involved with anything contrary to Jehovah's ways." "Tell me," I asked, "does God really forbid us to help people to feel better about their life and become successful with their undertakings?" "That is why we bring the good news to people," was the answer. Magda was intermittently telling me, "You see, that is why I was telling you. I was trying to tell you, but perhaps you had to hear it from our brothers." We continued having more cups of tea, coffee, and snacks. After a short period of silence, one of our guests asked me, "Do you still see the evil spirits? Do you still see the UFOs? And do you talk to the servants of the devil?" Obviously, after what Magda had been explaining to them, her alleged truth in respect to my person, and her dreamt of characteristics I was accused of, I deliberately said that I was talking to the servants of the devil right now, that they were all seated in front of me. But they did not get the point. It was so unusual for me to be questioned like this. I felt the need to take the opportunity to tell them what they were aching to hear. I was not intending to prolong their curiosity, and told them that it was now my turn. "Now, good people, if you would listen carefully to what I am about to tell you. Currently, if you have not been told already, I am practicing behavioral psychology, which I studied for many years without your support or encouragement, and it seems that what I know is far removed from your current comprehension. Psychology is a down-to-earth science, endeavoring to find solutions to people's emotional problems, while also helping them understand their own selves. It is a science which assists the inquirer to discover why human beings behave and think the way they do. It is a science aimed at finding ways for people willing to help themselves. And yes, I am teaching this science and more." Magda looked bewildered as she said, "You never explained it before. What other surprises I can expect of you, I wonder?" I answered, "But I have tried, and before hearing me out, you had your own conclusions about psychology, and most importantly about my personal characteristics. You cut me off every time." Upon which one of her dear brothers said, "Well, you should know that it is an evil practice, that is all." As soon as I said, "No, I cannot accept your assumptions, for they are untrue," Magda raised her voice and told me, "You are a rebel, an evil man. How can you talk to our brothers like that? There is no respect." Then one of them had an attitude problem. Verbally attacking, he said, "So you are now also against our judgments, and it is God's word you must listen." However, God's words are written by men, like you and I. Therefore I say that anything that leads people into darkness cannot be the truth. Then I asked if a loving God would destroy his supposed primary creation, men, in a worldwide flood, as we read in the Scriptures. And during their building of a tower, for whatever reason, he confused their tongues and nullified their endeavors. That same God was believed to be the only one who was of supreme order, and one could not understand such childish behavior on his part. It did not make any sense. God declares throughout his words we read in the Scriptures that he is a jealous God, and the wrath is his. Was there perhaps a wrong interpretation of his wisdom? Were these servants of God inspired to judge and condemn people like me for sins committed in opposition to their teachings? So you don't even believe in the Bible, the Word of God? If the Bible is so true, then tell me, I said, opening several pages from their holy book, and telling them about some of the discrepancies therein. Besides, I continued, why in the first place did God create every opportunity possible for humans to sin? In answer, one of them said, "Oh, but Jehovah had to test them to see if they were worthy of the everlasting life." I responded again with a question. However, what if life is everlasting anyway, only expressed in different dimensions? They looked at each other in a manner one could psychologically interpret, and was certain that they realized they were not going to get anywhere with me. I asked, Why did God allow humans to commit incest right from the beginning, if you are familiar with what I am pointing at? There was silence while they sipped their coffee and tea, which Magda graciously prepared for them. Then yet another asked, "How can you talk something like that?" At first I smiled, knowingly, and exclaimed, "Perhaps he just wanted to play games with his little toys." A long pause ensued. Suddenly, another of our guests asked in an angry tone of voice, "According to our sister, who can only tell the truth, you are talking to the spirits, listening to devils, and inviting UFOs. Tell us why you are still doing these things. Have you never learned that engaging in those things is sinful, and Jehovah commands us never to consult evil spirits?" Did she physically see me do these things, or was she delighting in telling them what they wanted to hear? Remember what she eagerly repeated, that when someone told her a lie as true, and she preached about it, nobody should blame her telling a lie. I was now in an extremely stirring mood, and so I commented, "You certainly remember the early beginnings of the organization and Charles Taze Russell's primary involvement with the Masonic Order. According to his understanding, talking to the spirits can be seen similar to praying to God. In truth, I believe in thought transference, and who knows, maybe we are all inspired by the inhabitants of other worlds in a wonderful universe. That universe is certainly filled with many life forms other than us. Even in your Bible, you can read heavens declaring the glory of God. What should we understand of it? Are we the only creation within the entire universe? There were no answers relating to subjects I questioned. Maybe I should have remembered that I was involved in an elementary school children's debate. A little while later, I turned to one of the Jehovah's Witness elders seated on my left and told him, "By the way, your grandmother is trying to communicate with you, as she was attempting to do for a very long time since you came. She is reminding you of your high school days, and if you remember all those years ago, you were asking her if it was any good after the school concert. Remember, you wished your other grandmother was there to see you. The other one is asking me to tell you she was also there, and she remembers it all with every detail. They are encouraging me to tell you that if you want, they will recite them for you." This was a great shock to every one of them, and I noticed some very pale faces, and felt they were experiencing a sense of extreme fear and confusion. Obviously, they could only interpret it according to what they were trained to believe. In truth, I was pretending, thanks to my theatrical training. I will tell you a little more about my debate with the Judicial Committee members in a little while. But first, let me talk about how it all ended. They looked at each other, and at least two of them looked terrified, as if the devil was trying to tempt the faithful. They were uttering prayers in a whisper and trepidation. The others exclaimed that it was 100% correct, and only the devil could know all the details. I responded with, "Oh, you mean this devil is a very intelligent dude?" One seated directly opposite me said, "Dear sister, we have nothing else left to speak." They were no longer looking in my direction, and trying their utmost not to have any eye contact, while I was laughing at them from within. All of a sudden, I was like the wind, gently blowing in the forest, and they no longer acknowledged my presence. I felt for them, and especially for Magda. One of them said, "You will hear from us soon." So saying, they could not leave us fast enough, as if running away from the Black Plague. Completely shaken, Magda could not contain her tears as she accompanied them to the door, and stood outside for well over an hour, chatting with them. I could hear all her agonizing concerns and words like, "You cannot live with a devil worshipper and an apostate like him, but he is still your husband. You must reconsider your position." One could hear her crying voice telling them, "I will have to leave him now, and my concern is their children." As she entered, like a raging bull, slamming the door behind her, she must have thought I wanted to hug her, and shouted very loudly, pushing me with her shoulder, saying, "You Satan! Don't you ever touch me!" She called the children to her, and started telling them, "We'll find a way to live somewhere else, and I am not going to allow the evil one to touch you." However, I feel the need to tell you a little more about how she almost immediately began the strict indoctrination of our children, which was supposedly to protect them from me, teaching them not to have anything to do with the devil, and that their father had committed the greatest sin the moment he told her the truth. She would not even allow me to say a word. For several days she would not talk to me, as if I was there only to hurt them. As far as she was concerned, I was the rejected of God, and therefore unimportant to speak of or to. When any of the children laughed with me, or attempted to ask me something, Magda always made sure they went to her for completely no reason. She deliberately had a question to ask them, or tell them to get her a glass of water. It was all done to keep them occupied so that they could never approach me. Besides, she could never talk to someone shunned like me, for she would commit a great sin in line with their teachings, leading her to be disfellowshipped. When she wanted to go to the shops, every one of them was forced to go with her. When she wanted to go house to house to preach, they were all ordered to go with their mother. When she had to go out on her own, she strictly advised them to go to their rooms and read the Bible, and not approach their daddy. Was I by any chance a piece of furniture, or dog's poo? Even in my wildest dreams, I never imagined so much hatred being directed at me. Obviously, she was doing what she was dictated to do by her most faithful brothers and sisters. Who, indeed, was the real master and originator of complete hatred, according to Jehovah's Witness teachings? This is just one thought to ponder on. This went on for a very long time. Whenever she returned from her most important associations and service, discovering Annette, for instance, happily chatting with her father, she immediately called the child to do something completely out of place, and as time went on, the children began to develop a mildly rebellious attitude towards their mother. This led them to being severely punished by her. Those punishments were extremely hurtful, and could be classified as child abuse. But I dared say nothing. Much later, one discovers Annette having developed a form of trauma, like self-hatred, self-mutilations, and consuming cleaning liquids more often than before, when she occasionally swallowed those chemicals after being attracted to these colorful bottles. I was literally forced to feel guilty for crimes uncommitted. Was my care and love for my family a crime, because I had different opinions on belief systems? Since we had no verbal communication, I attempted to talk to her as if I was talking to the air. She must then have spoken to her faithful brothers as she began to talk to me only about necessities like bill payment, shopping, and what the children needed. The members of her real family must have reiterated that she should be able to communicate with her husband, who was, after all, the children's father. And she later confirmed this. Alas, she was simply a witness's servant, blindly following their dictates. In reality, this was not a new development, and probably impossible to change. After many months, she slowly allowed me to at least laugh with my children, and Birgit began to show me her works of art, which she did at school. However, Magda wanted to keep Claude only to herself. Birgit, even at that very young age, occasionally asked me if I loved her as much as I loved Annette, obliging me to explain that my love was forever for every one of them. She even asked me if I loved her mother, making one wonder why a child of her age had to question me like that. How could one answer? Despite all the nonsense I was subjected to, my love was unconditional, for I love every human being, while Magda's love needed to grow. I remember how Birgit had poured boiling water from the top of the stove, burning part of her face and chest when she was about 2. I remember how worried I was when taking her to the Royal Children's Hospital. Her burns were 3rd degree, but after some important procedure she was subjected to, and large sums paid by me to a specialist from overseas, we were advised that it would leave no marks as she grew older. But in the meantime, she needed a few skin grafts and blood transfusions. Magda was happy with every other procedure, but she would never allow any blood transfusions. This panicked the nurses, doctors, and me, because without the transfusion she would not survive, as she had already lost a considerable amount of blood. Magda showed her no blood transfusions card, issued by the witnesses, and strictly advised the medical staff against any such treatment. It was beyond me to see one's child suffer and die due to such criminal neglect. What did members of the Jehovah's Witnesses Judicial Committee consider such unethical behavior pattern on their part? I think we all know the answer to that. There was a desperate need to discreetly speak with the doctors and nurses, telling them to do everything possible to save Birgit's life. I was even prepared to give my own blood if there was need, and it matched. They gave her a certain amount of blood, and her color became healthier, and nearly a month later she was home. Out of my love, I would not deny her the necessary treatment. Yet, in remembering that memorable occasion, I am not implying that her mother did not care. Magda did not know anything about my interference, but if I had not done anything, Birgit would not be with us today. Magda was following a cultist movement which did not care about physical life. Maybe they should not have been born, instead waiting until the new world is established after Armageddon. Maybe their God Jehovah did not think it important at the time. On the other hand, we discover Annette often foaming from her mouth as she had drunk poisonous liquids from the colorful bottles in the laundry or toilet, and rushed her to hospital. If there was no love, how could I even think about immediately taking her in the ambulance to hospital for necessary medical procedures? They were kept in supposedly child-proof cupboards, but somehow she managed to open them. But remember, right in the beginning, when she was a few weeks old, her grandparents had been snatching her from my hands, telling me she was theirs. Even if that was meant to be one of their coldest jokes, it left quite a remarkable impression on Annette's personality. one could not be sure what she had been told about me, especially after being condemned as the great sinner by the Jehovah's Witness elders for my grave sins against the Spirit. I cannot forget how Magda tried hard to alienate them against me in the name of a God she had been introduced to when studying the Bible with the witnesses, considering his divine rules for discipline. That also had an influence on the children's attitude towards life, further turning them against me, their father. Magda was a confused soul who sought advice from a group of witnesses she trusted, allegedly following Jehovah's rules. But did she ever realize she was actually following mediocre-minded friends who considered themselves as the witnesses of God? They were certainly passionate about their own personalized viewpoints as being the grand truth, following a few uninspired men. Now Magda was advised to consider that I was still her husband, and although she wanted to leave me, she could not, unless I committed another grievous sin by having a sexual relationship with another woman. In a sense, she was expecting me to do just that, and this way she would have a good reason to officially leave me. These memories keep churning in my head whenever I think of her special words, and so I tend to repeat myself quite analytically, leading me to discover new lines of concern. I have no doubt in my mind that she never loved me as I loved her, although she never spoke about it directly. The influence of her parental home, when still a spinster and just starting to know me, the foreigner, had some bearing. Repeatedly responding to me with "love can grow" whenever I asked her if she loved me. I was not sure if she had really loved me or cared at all. Whenever we spoke about her desire to leave me, I told her that after this one experience, I would not want to be involved in marriage any more. She often told me she would also not want to be married to anybody unless somebody truly faithful came along. Maybe one day, I told her, we will see each other from a distance, when we are old and gray, and say that it is too late now, too late to rekindle the love we thought was ours. After that wonderful meeting with the Judicial Committee, she was advised, as she told me after a weekly gathering, that her dear brothers and sisters had advised her to talk to me, and maybe I would sincerely seek God's forgiveness, and they could again accept me in their midst. How thoughtful! However, I would probably need a long time, during which I would be subjected to daily Bible studies with an appointed servant of Jehovah. Many years later, they were to change their tactics by allowing the excommunicated to come and sit in the kingdom halls, although nobody would ever talk to or greet them, for shunning due to their extreme hatred of the disobedient was part of the faith. About a week later, they sent me the expected letter of great importance, which declared that under divine guidance, and after considering the facts in light of the Bible teachings, I was now disfellowshipped and no longer called a brother. I wondered how they can do so under the divine guidance when they themselves now declare that they are not inspired and can err. Can you imagine how delighted I was? Listen to what Henry Wadsworth Longfellow says. If spring came but once a century instead of once a year, or burst forth with the sound of an earthquake, and not in silence, what wonder and expectation there would be in all the hearts to behold the miraculous change.